There exists a ritual, a personal and almost sacred ceremony known only to the true devotees of music. It is the act of extinguishing the lights, of donning a pair of headphones as if they were an astronaut's helmet for the exploration of inner space, and of surrendering oneself completely to a work of art, allowing it to hijack ordinary reality and transport us far beyond the familiar walls of our room, far beyond the very frontiers of our own time. Some songs are pleasant voyages, sonic landscapes that comfort and caress us like a familiar embrace. Others, however, are expeditions of conquest. They demand our courage, our focus, the spirit of an intrepid explorer. They do not offer us a leisurely stroll through a manicured park. They invite us to scale their own private Everest, to dive into their deepest, most turbulent ocean, promising, as a reward for our efforts, a view from the summit or a treasure from the depths that can fundamentally and permanently redefine our perception of art itself. In the pantheon of these monumental works, these transformative, life-altering journeys, few stand as imposing, as mysterious, and as overwhelmingly beautiful as Supper's Ready, the 23-minute sonic odyssey conceived by the English band Genesis in 1972. To many, it is the Sagrada Familia of progressive rock, a cathedral of sound, a structure of almost divine complexity, both beautiful and profoundly intimidating in equal measure. But today, our purpose is radically different. We will not merely admire it from a safe distance, like tourists snapping photographs. We are to become its architects, its archaeologists. We will enter, armed with maps and lanterns, to explore every hallowed nave, every vibrant stained glass window, every forgotten dusty crypt. We will uncover the original sweat-stained blueprint of its construction, decipher the mystical symbols woven into its vast sonic tapestry, and finally understand why, more than half a century later, this piece is not just music. It is a rite of passage, an initiatory journey disguised as a song. This is the anatomy of a miracle. This is the untold story of how 5 young Englishmen, driven by a potent and volatile mixture of genius, desperation, and a terrifying vision, dared to build an entire functioning universe in 23 short minutes. And in order for this expedition to reach other explorers like you, so that we may map these still largely uncharted sonic continents together, I ask that you perform a crucial gesture right now, at the very beginning of our shared journey. Please subscribe to our channel, Psych Prog, leave a like so that the great digital gods understand the cultural and historical relevance of this analysis, and most importantly, share this video with everyone you believe is ready for this profound immersion. Your active participation is what transforms this monologue into a dialogue, into a vibrant community of art explorers setting out into the great, thrilling unknown. To comprehend the sheer, inconceivable audacity of Supper's Ready, we must first calibrate our time machine and transport ourselves to the England of 1972. This wasn't the swinging London of Austin Powers. The cultural and musical landscape was a seething cauldron, a veritable battlefield of ambition and virtuosity. The brightly colored, chemically fueled optimism of the 1960s had faded, its psychedelic promise curdling into a more somber, introspective, and complex reality. Britain was a country grappling with its post-imperial identity, beset by industrial strikes, economic stagnation, and the looming specter of the 3-day week. It was a gray, uncertain time, and out of that grayness, art often explodes in the most vivid colors. Progressive rock was the most eloquent and ambitious child of this new, more serious age. It was a music of escape, yes, but also of deep engagement, of building new, more complex worlds as a response to one that felt like it was crumbling. The giants of the genre were casting long shadows. Yes, with their recently released masterpiece, Close to the Edge, had crafted a work of superhuman technical complexity and cosmic lyricism that redefined the very limits of the album format. It was music as philosophy, as celestial mathematics, sung by an angel from another dimension. Emerson, Lake and Palmer, with their album Trilogy, were continuing their crusade of setting arenas ablaze with a bombastic and spectacular fusion of rock, jazz, and classical music. turning concerts into breathtaking demonstrations of instrumental might and pyrotechnic showmanship. And Jethro Tull, with the sheer, unprecedented, and wonderfully absurd audacity of Thick as a Brick, had composed an entire album that was, in fact, a single continuous 43-minute song, a staggering feat of endurance and narrative cohesion, wrapped in a satirical newspaper. In this pantheon of titans, Genesis was still perceived by many, and perhaps even by themselves, as a secondary player, a gifted but overly quaint prince in a court of reigning kings. Their previous album, 1971's Nursery Crime, had been a critical success, acclaimed by the discerning music press for its eccentric theatricality and its unique, quintessentially English narratives that felt like Gothic Victorian fables or twisted nursery rhymes set to music. But its commercial reach was still modest. They were the storytellers, the bards of a fantastical and distinctly English literary world, in a scene that seemed increasingly obsessed with the sheer velocity of fingers on guitar frets and the monumental scale of Marshall amplifier stacks. The pressure from their record label, the visionary Charisma Records run by the legendary impresario and bon vivant Tony Stratton Smith, was immense, albeit of an artistic nature. Strat, as he was affectionately known, wasn't demanding a 3-minute radio hit. He was demanding a masterpiece. He believed, with a patron's passionate conviction, that this band of well-spoken former public schoolboys had the potential for true, lasting greatness, but they needed a definitive, undeniable statement. It was no longer enough to be good, interesting, or creative. They had to be unforgettable. Genesis needed a work that would not only put them on equal footing with their peers, but would carve out an entirely new category for themselves. A niche that only they, with their bizarre blend of pastoral beauty and theatrical grotesquerie, could possibly occupy. The very genesis of Supper's Ready is, in itself, a powerful and messy antidote to the persistent, romanticized myth of the lone, divinely inspired genius. It is a profound lesson in the often contentious, frustrating, yet ultimately transcendent power of collaboration, of creative friction, and of sheer, dumb, blind luck. It did not spring fully formed from a unified vision, from a pre-established concept handed down by a single dominant leader. Its origin is far more organic, fragmented, and for that very reason, more miraculous. It was a treasure chest of scattered musical jewels, brilliant but seemingly incompatible fragments of ideas that each member of the band brought into the damp, cramped rehearsal room like nervous offerings. Tony Banks, the group's quiet and cerebral sonic architect, an introverted pianist with the soul of a Russian classical composer, a man who worshipped Rachmaninoff and Shostakovich, had composed a powerful, dramatic, and intensely cinematic sequence of chords. It was a musically sophisticated piece, full of harmonic tension and dramatic resolution, but it seemed too grand, too structurally complex to be shoehorned into the format of a conventional pop-rock song. It was a magnificent beginning without a middle and an epic end without a start. Mike Rutherford, with his unique and highly influential approach to stringed instruments, particularly his technique of playing intricate, chiming parts on a Rickenbacker 12-string guitar while simultaneously providing the rich bass foundation with a set of Dutron bass pedals, had a delicate and melancholic acoustic love song on his hands. Its arpeggios seemed to float in the air like dust motes in a shaft of cathedral sunlight. It was a piece of quintessential English pastoralism, imbued with a fragile and deeply moving beauty that felt a world away from the bombast of their peers. Steve Hackett, the newest member and the band's designated sonic painter, was a guitarist who thought not in terms of blues-based riffs, but in textures, colors, and moods. He brought the disciplined fingerstyle technique of a classical guitarist like Andres Segovia and the contrapuntal sensibility of J.S. Bach to the electric guitar, and he was at the absolute forefront of exploring new, untapped sonic territories. He was quietly perfecting techniques like two-handed tapping on the fretboard, years before Eddie Van Halen would popularize it and claim it as his own, and the innovative, expressive use of a simple volume pedal to make his guitar swell and sing with the mournful, sustained voice of a cello. And Phil Collins, long before his ascent to global pop icon status, was the band's secret weapon, its powerhouse, dynamically sensitive engine. He was a drummer with the nuanced touch and rhythmic vocabulary of a seasoned jazz fusion musician. A master of dynamics, subtlety, and polyrhythmic complexity, capable of playing the most intricate and demanding parts with a lightness of touch and a propulsive, infectious swing that few could ever match. The band, therefore, possessed an arsenal of brilliant musical ideas, but they were puzzle pieces from entirely different boxes. They were luminous fragments of distinct and seemingly irreconcilable universes. Herein, at this critical juncture, lies the great challenge, the point of tension that could have, and very nearly did, cause the entire ambitious project to implode before it even truly began. Commercial logic, the relentless industry pressure for a radio-friendly single, and even conventional artistic logic dictated that these disparate sections should be developed as separate songs. Perhaps they could form a thematic suite on one side of the vinyl, but as distinct digestible tracks, each with its own clear beginning and end. The very idea of stitching all these fragments together, the quasi-classical overture, the intimate folk song, the avant-garde guitar experiments, the satirical march, into a single, continuous narrative piece of 23 minutes was, in the eyes of any sane person in the music industry, an act of breathtaking youthful hubris, a commercial suicide note written in musical notation. It was a direct invitation for the casual listener to simply lift the needle from the turntable after the first, deceptively gentle section. The band retreated for a period of intensive, isolated rehearsals at a place called the Glass Menagerie, a former nursing home for the elderly in Box Hill, Surrey, a location that was reportedly as damp and dispiriting as it sounds. The isolation was necessary for focus, but it also had the effect of amplifying the internal pressures and personality clashes. The atmosphere, according to the members' own candid accounts in later interviews, was one of feverish and electrifying creativity, but also of paralyzing anxiety, frustration, and heated, sometimes bitter arguments. How could Hackett's delicate Baroque pastoralism possibly be united with Banks's bombastic symphonic drama? How could a credible, believable bridge be constructed to lead the listener from an ethereal love song into a piece that sounded like a bizarre military march from a satirical play? The risk of giving birth to a musical Frankenstein's monster, a misshapen, pretentious, and ultimately tedious collage of unconnected ideas, was immense and ever-present. The band could have retreated. They could have chosen the safe, sensible path, fragmented the ideas, and released a more conventional, more commercially viable album that would have pleased the record company but satisfied no one in the band. They might have become a footnote, a fondly remembered but ultimately minor act, but an extraordinary, deeply personal, and genuinely terrifying event would provide the conceptual mortar, the narrative backbone that would transform this chaotic patchwork quilt into a cohesive, haunting, and ultimately redemptive artistic fresco. The key that unlocked the creative enigma and gave Supper's Ready its profound soul and its unwavering, almost terrifying purpose came from a harrowing experience lived by Peter Gabriel and his wife at the time, Jill Moore. One night, in the seeming safety of her parents' bedroom in the London borough of Kensington, in what Gabriel would later describe with a chilling mixture of unwavering conviction and lingering bewilderment as a psychic or supernatural event, he witnessed something that shook him to his very core. He reported seeing, with his eyes wide open, Jill's face begin to contort and transform into a terrifying succession of other visages, as if multiple entities were possessing her and using her as a vessel. A voice that was not hers, a voice that was deeper and more menacing, seemed to emanate from her body. The room, he recounted, suddenly became glacially cold. A bizarre and pulsating violet light filled the space, and an overwhelming, suffocating sensation of a malevolent presence, of an invisible battle between forces of good and evil being waged right there in that very room, took hold of him. Terrified and feeling utterly powerless, Gabriel reacted instinctively, grabbing a pair of silver candlesticks from the mantelpiece and forming crosses with them, feeling like an unprepared, conscripted soldier in a spiritual war of cosmic proportions. The experience, which lasted for what felt like an eternity, culminated in the clear, waking vision of 7 silent, shrouded figures standing outside the second-story window, observing the scene with a silent, unnerving intensity. Although a more rational medical explanation later emerged, Jill was undergoing a complex and experimental medical treatment at the time, and one of the prescribed drugs could have caused vivid hallucinations as a side effect, both in her and, by power of suggestion, in a highly stressed Peter. For Gabriel, the intensity, the terror, and the visceral reality of that experience were absolute and undeniable. It was no longer a literary fantasy borrowed from a book or a distant myth from antiquity. It was a first-hand testimony. This apocalyptic vision, this terrifying personal epiphany, became the golden narrative thread that would sew all the disparate musical fragments together into a single, coherent tapestry. It gave Gabriel the almost fanatical conviction he needed to push his bizarre, sprawling vision through, against the understandable skepticism of his bandmates. Supper's Ready ceased to be a mere exercise in progressive rock virtuosity and became the musicalization of an archetypal battle between good and evil, fought not on some distant celestial battlefield, but in the terrifying intimacy of a bedroom, in the fragile and vulnerable landscape of the human psyche. With this powerful and deeply personal narrative anchor, the assembly of the suite, once an unsolvable puzzle, began to make a profound and disturbing kind of sense. Mike Rutherford's gentle love song was immediately recontextualized, becoming Lover's Leap, the deceptively calm gateway to this mystical and perilous journey. The lovers in the lyrics are no longer just a simple couple sharing a moment of tenderness. They become the microcosm of all humanity, a modern Adam and Eve who, by merging, two souls as one, transcend their physical bodies and begin a perilous journey out of the material world and into the spiritual plane. The lyric and its "Hello babe, with your guardian eyes so blue, hey my baby, don't you know our love is true," establishes a foundation of pure, innocent love that will be severely tested over the course of the piece. The direct, chilling reference to Gabriel's vision appears subtly, almost as a whispered omen. 6 saintly shrouded men move across the lawn slowly. The 7th, one presumes, was just out of sight, or perhaps was the observer himself. The piece then unspools, not into separate songs, but into 7 distinct movements, a number dripping with mystical and biblical resonance from the 7 trumpets of the Book of Revelation to the 7 days of creation. The transition to the second movement, the guaranteed eternal sanctuary man, is the first of many sonic and thematic shocks designed to keep the listener on their toes. The acoustic delicacy of the interwoven 12-string guitars and Gabriel's ethereal flute is abruptly interrupted by an almost circus-like march, led by the distinctive, slightly reedy sound of Tony Banks's Hammond L122 organ, which he deliberately makes sound like a cheap, tacky fairground instrument. Gabriel, the master of theatricality, assumes the persona of a smarmy charlatan, a grotesque amalgam of a cult leader, a populist politician, and a corporate televangelist who sells salvation, as if it were a prepackaged commodity. "We've got everything. We're growing everything. We've got everything you need," he sings, his voice dripping with a false, ingratiating enthusiasm that is deeply unsettling. This isn't just social critique. It's a piece of vicious, timeless satire, a funhouse mirror held up to the burgeoning culture of televangelism and the cynical selling of spiritual snake oil. This section represents the first manifestation of evil in the narrative, not as a cartoonish, horned demon, but as the insidious and seductive voice of falsehood, materialism, and empty, easy promises. Next, the suite throws us headlong into the sonic fury of Ichnaton and Itzakon and their band of merry men. Here, the battle that was previously only suggested becomes literal, sonic, and utterly overwhelming. The music explodes into a torrent of sound, where Mike Rutherford's percussive bass pedals pulse like a panicked heart, and Phil Collins's drumming establishes a complex, driving, and relentless martial cadence that sounds like an army on the march. Steve Hackett's guitar, now distorted and aggressive, and Tony Banks's keyboards, particularly the mighty Mellotron with its hauntingly beautiful, yet unstable string and choir sounds, duel furiously, like two opposing armies clashing on an ancient, blood-soaked battlefield. The choice of Akhenaton, the historical pharaoh, as a central figure is a stroke of literary genius. This 14th century BC ruler is a fascinating and tragic historical figure, a revolutionary who attempted to impose a monotheistic religion, the cult of the sun god Aten, on the deeply polytheistic society of ancient Egypt. He was an idealist, a visionary, perhaps even a mystic, but his revolution was imposed with force and ultimately ended in catastrophic failure, with his legacy being systematically and violently erased by his successors. He becomes, within the song, a powerful symbol for the battle of ideals, for the noble struggle for a new order that, so often in human history, results in more chaos and destruction. The Itzikon in the title is widely believed to be a classic Gabriel pun. Itzikon, the band of merry men, suggests a misguided crusade. It is the echo of Gabriel's intensely personal spiritual battle, now projected onto an epic and tragic historical canvas. This meticulous exploration of the layers of meaning, the musical architecture, and the raw human context behind Supper's Ready is the very essence of our work here on this channel. If you feel that your ears are opening to details you had never noticed before, if the story behind the music is making it an even richer and more powerful experience for you, then please help us to continue this mission. This is a perfect moment to remember to leave a like, which helps more people discover our channel PsychProg, and to share this video with those friends who you know appreciate a good story and a deep, respectful, no-holds-barred analysis. Your interaction is our greatest encouragement and our most valuable resource. The journey, however, is a master of subverting our expectations at every single turn. After the deafening roar of battle, the music recedes into an almost absolute, unnerving silence, and a soft, reflective, almost whispered voice asks the question, "How dare I be so beautiful?" We are instantly transported from the dusty plains of Giza to the misty shores of a mythical pool, where we encounter the figure of Narcissus, the beautiful youth of Greek mythology who became so entranced by his own reflection that he fell in and drowned. Musically, the piece is a masterclass in astonishing economy. Just a gentle, rippling electric piano and Gabriel's vulnerable, unadorned voice. It is a moment of profound introspection on vanity, the ego, and the spiritual dangers of self-obsession, the seed of destruction that comes not from an external enemy, but is born from within us. It's a startlingly self-aware moment, a critique of the very rock and roll ego that was rampant at the time. On stage, this was one of the most visually striking and memorable moments of the show. Gabriel, wearing a simple but unnerving mask of a flower, would enact this monologue with an intensity that brilliantly straddled the line between the comical and the deeply tragic. It is a crucial philosophical pause, the moment of hubris that, as in classical Greek tragedy, always precedes the fall, and which prepares us, unknowingly, for the most bizarre and bewildering of all the sections, and then Willow Farm. For many first-time listeners, this is the great filter, the inflection point where you either abandon the journey, utterly confused and irritated, or you surrender completely to the madness with a bewildered smile on your face. Musically, it is a deliberate and gleeful collapse of all the logic, seriousness, and epic grandeur that has been so carefully constructed up to this point. It is a psychedelic vaudeville act, a demented nursery rhyme that sounds as if it were composed by Lewis Carroll under the influence of laughing gas, or perhaps a lost track from the Bonzo Dog Doo-Dah Band. The time signature changes are dizzying, abrupt, and seemingly random. The sound effects are unabashedly cartoonish, including cackling laughter, slide whistles, and the iconic deadpan delivery of the line, "a flower." The lyrics are a surrealist stream of consciousness that joyfully mashes together images of mundane English domesticity. Mum and Dad are kissing. The frog was a prince, with the purest nonsense and biting social commentary. Winston Churchill dressed in drag. It's a glorious act of musical anarchy, a sudden shocking explosion of Dadaist humor right in the middle of what seemed to be a biblical epic. It connects directly to a long tradition of English absurdism, from Edward Lear to Monty Python's Flying Circus, which was at the height of its power in 1972. Gabriel himself described this section as an antidote to pomposity, a necessary way to inject humor and absurdity into the proceedings so that the work would not collapse under the weight of its own ambition. But its dramaturgical function is far deeper and more cunning. It is a cognitive reset. It shatters the listener's solemnity, it breaks the fourth wall, and it throws us into a state of complete and utter disorientation, of maximum suspension and expectation. The very floor disappears from under our feet. What on earth could possibly come next? Where can the music possibly go after reaching the absolute apex of absurdity? The answer is the apocalypse. And so, without a moment's warning, we are dragged into the heart of the storm, into the sonic vortex that has become synonymous with the raw power and transcendent glory of progressive rock. Apocalypse in 9/8, co-starring the delicious talents of Gabble Ratchet. This is the absolute climax of the narrative and musical tension. Tony Banks unleashes one of the most iconic, hypnotic, and genuinely haunting organ riffs in the history of rock, performed on his Hammond. Organ played through a swirling Leslie speaker, all in a relentless 9/8 time signature. This unusual meter, which can be felt as 3 groups of 3 beats, creates a limping, inexorable pulse, a kind of limping waltz that constantly throws the listener off balance, generating a physical sensation of urgency and unease. Upon this hypnotic and deeply disturbing foundation, Phil Collins delivers what is, for many critics and fans alike, the most celebrated and influential drum performance of his entire career. It is not just rhythm, it is a narrative force of its own, a story told in violence, power, and heroic resistance. His drumming does not simply accompany the music, it propels it, it whips it, it becomes the raging protagonist of the section, a masterclass in controlled power and musicality. Gabriel's voice, now stripped of all masks and personas, sounds like that of a biblical prophet in the midst of Armageddon, screaming about the return of the apocalyptic figures of Gog and Magog from the book of Ezekiel, about dragons, the fire of the gods, and the number 666, while Steve Hackett's guitar slashes through the air with solos that are not melodic in a traditional sense, but are textural and violent, using his volume pedal and tapping technique to create sounds like shrieks, and sirens like flashes of lightning in a roiling, pitch-black storm. The section's bizarre subtitle is a reference to Gabble Ratchet, the spectral hounds of hell from the folklore of northern England, said to fly through the night skies in search of lost souls. A terrifyingly apt image. For long, tense, and excruciating minutes, the band keeps us suspended in this dizzying, terrifying climax, piling layer upon layer of sound and fury, building a monolithic sonic wall that seems about to collapse and crush us at any moment. The experience is visceral, almost unbearable. The music is no longer merely heard, it is felt in the pit of the stomach, in the frantic pulsing of the temples. The question that hangs unspoken in the midst of the chaos is, how can this possibly end? Will there be any redemption, any peace, any light, after such total and utter destruction? The answer arrives not with a bang, but with a sudden, blinding, beatific light. The transition to the 7th and final movement, as sure as eggs is eggs, aching men's feet, is one of the most cathartic and emotionally powerful moments ever recorded on magnetic tape. The sonic storm of the apocalypse dissipates instantly, like a thick fog at sunrise, giving way to a triumphant, majestic, and overwhelmingly beautiful melody. The chords of Banks's Hammond organ and mellotron become anthems of pure glory. Hackett's guitar sounds like a host of celestial trumpets heralding a great victory, and the rhythm section of Rutherford and Collins establishes a grand, stately, and redemptive march to the end. And Gabriel, his voice choked with a palpable and genuine emotion, sings the words of final resolution. Can't you see he's fooled you all? Lord of Lords, King of Kings, has returned to lead his children home, to take them to the New Jerusalem. In a final, breathtaking stroke of compositional genius, the main, soaring melody of this section is the very same melody that was so subtly hinted at in the beginning, in Lover's Leap, played fragilely on a lone oboe. Now it returns in its full, magnificent form, transposed into a triumphant major key, transformed, glorious, closing the musical and narrative cycle of the work with absolute perfection. The reference to the New Jerusalem, the heavenly city from the Book of Revelation, confirms the final victory of good, the arrival in the promised land. It is redemption. It is catharsis. Supper, after all, is ready. The song ends in a long, majestic and slowly receding fade out, as if the celestial vision were gradually withdrawing, leaving us back in our reality, exhausted, emotionally drained, but irrevocably and forever changed. The untold story, the deep and intricate story of Supper's Ready, is therefore the chronicle of how scattered fragments became a towering epic, of how personal trauma and nocturnal terror were alchemically transmuted into universal and timeless art, and of how the artistic audacity and sheer bloody-minded courage of 5 young men redefined the very boundaries of what was possible to achieve with the language of rock music. It is living, breathing proof that a song can be infinitely more than just a song. It can be an architecture for the soul, a detailed map to the deepest and most unexplored territories of our collective imagination and our shared spirit. Climbing it may be a challenge, yes, but the view from the top, that feeling of catharsis, of liberation and of profound, wordless understanding, is a reward that echoes throughout a lifetime. It is a work of art that does not age, for it speaks directly to the timeless, archetypal journey of the hero that exists within every single one of us. I hope this deep and detailed immersion has been as revealing and as exciting for you as it was for me to prepare it. This is our ultimate goal here at Psych Prog, not just to listen to the music, but to live it, to understand it, and to allow it, in its own mysterious way, to transform us. If you felt the awesome power of this epic journey and want to continue exploring the great monuments of music with us, your next step is crucial and helps us immeasurably. Subscribe to our channel right now. Activate the notification bell so you'll be the first to know about our future analyses, and most importantly, dive headfirst into our extensive video archive. We have already unraveled the secrets of masterworks by Pink Floyd, Yes, King Crimson, Rush, and many other giants. Your subscription is what builds and strengthens this passionate community. Join us, and let's continue this incredible progressive experience together.